Hello, the problem of today is a stunning problem by Christopher Reeves, who died less than 10 years ago, who was a great composer of Great Britain, and here he made a very, very important problem with very heavy content and very nice to solve. So I invite everybody to take a while and to solve by himself the problem here, and we begin immediately to analyze the content. So the jail of the Black King is completely done. The C6 square is controlled by the bishop and the rook. The DC square is controlled by the rook and by the knight. The E6 square is controlled by the bishop. The E5 square is controlled by the rook and by the knight D3. E4 is controlled only by the rook. The square on D4 is controlled by the pawn, the knight, and the bishop. And on C4, only the pawn C3 controls. On C5, you have the pawn, the knight, and the bishop F2 that are controlling this. So, all in all, you have complete control over all the squares around the king. You have two possible flight that can be given. If the knight F7 plays on E5, you have rook takes E5. It gives a flight, but you have a mate immediately. And you have two very strong black move, that is queen takes D7 or knight takes D7, and it gives the flight on E6. Now, if you look the possible check or mates that are on the diagram set for white, you have a check on F4 that is controlled only by the bishop D2, and on E3 also you have a check that is controlled only by the bishop D2. The mate on E7 is controlled by the queen, and the rook cannot give. Here it cannot give mate because of the control of E4, but the rook is controlled by the knight on E5. Now, because of the flight on E6 that black can provoke by taking D7, a natural threat would be we can think that the natural threat will be on F4 by the knight, because on A4 you have a check and also a control of E6. And a natural way to provoke this is to put something on E3. So let's try immediately and have a look, let's say, for rook on E3. And have a look on the defenses we can think now. You have bishop takes the knight, so you cannot mate anymore. Rook takes D3, mate. You have rook takes B4 that controls F4, and there you have something that is to be well understood. The knight cannot take on B4 because of the key that closed the line F2 C5, and then the knight cannot anymore play when the pawn B4 is taken. But the rook went on E3, control E6, and then you may have bishop takes on C6 mate. So the interception of the bishop is in any case compensated by the control of e6. You have knight h5 that controls f4, and now you use the fact that the pawn on e2 cannot mate anymore on e4, and in fact this is a refutation. You have no mate, so the move rook e3 is only a try. So let's try for example to play e3, so that on knight h5 you will have e4 mate, and you have on bishop takes d3, you use the fact that the bishop cannot be taken by the rook h3, but now the square on e2 is empty, so the queen can take on d3 instead of the rook h3, and you have rook takes b4, and this is using the fact that the knight on d3 has to guard now c5, and the bishop cannot move to c6 because it has to control e6, and so this is a refutation. Rook takes b4 is not followed by any mate. Let's try now bishop goes to e3, so you'll have on rook takes b4, knight takes. On knight h5 you have queen f3, because now the line has been opened by the move of the bishop, and it comes queen f3 instead of e2 e4 mate. But bishop takes d3 is not followed by anything. The rook is closed, and nothing comes in place of it. So we have the three tries that are refuted in turn, and each white piece in fact intercepts one of the others in a cyclical way. The bishop, let's say, the bishop intercepts the rook intercepts the pawn, and the pawn intercepts the bishop. And we have to find the key and how to threaten on f4, and there is a way to threaten on f4 without putting anything on e3. It is queen d1, that is a pre-pin of the bishop. It means that now when the knight will play on f4, the bishop d2 will be pinned and will not be able to take. Though it is not pinned immediately, it will be pinned at the time of the mate. So now we have the threat. So once again, rook or knight takes on d7 is not a defense, and we have the three thematic moves we saw immediately that are not bothered by the key. Knight h5 is followed by e4. Rook takes b4 is followed by knight takes b4. Bishop takes d3 is followed by rook takes d3. You have two other variations, queen b8 followed by knight e7 and knight e5, that is giving a flight and so forbidding the knight to mate, and it gives rook takes knight on e5. So you have a pretty hidden activity of the white queen. She controls on one play on f3, on another one on d3, and she finally makes the key with threatening the king on d5 from d1. So very surprising activity of the queen, and also very heavy content, and I don't think there is any other problem that shows this kind of content. So a unique piece of work, a wonderful problem. I hope you'll enjoy it, and goodbye.